Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is one of my worm bins. Let me get you in a little closer. It's a system which has now reached the age of 132 days of age. Not bad. A lot of my systems go up around 200 days of age sometimes. And it's usually after about 100 days of age that I try to start tailoring the feedings in such a way that it's going to lend itself to like a smooth and easy harvest of the castings out of the material. So a lot of times addition of bedding, especially stuff that's going to take a long time to break down, is something I try to avoid in systems that are a little bit older. But here, last time, somehow we felt like, what the heck, let's just give them a big pile of bedding. All right, let me get a glove on so we can get messy here. Okay, that's better. So now here, where the coffee filter was, we're going to check in there to see how that last feeding from 10 days ago is coming along. And the cool thing about the way we've been feeding here is that every time you go counterclockwise to the previous corner, and 10 days ago this was the previous corner, we can see how the carrots and asparagus and the potato peels were progressing. And then, since there was another 10-day interval between the most recent feeding and the previous feeding of bananas, we can see how 20-day-old banana peels are coming along down in here. And I don't think there were any traces of the leftovers from the previous feeding prior to that. But then even going back to here, 30 days, after 30 days, the cantaloupe rinds that were put in here might not show any signs of wear. And then even further, 40 days to the corner where we're going to be feeding today, potato peels were placed in here as well. But I wouldn't expect to see a whole lot of that in here either. But before we get into here to see how the 40-day-old feeding is progressing and to add today's feeding, we'll just do a quick time warp. How's the 10-day-old carrots doing? How are the 20-day-old banana peels doing? 30-day-old cantaloupe, etc. So let's check out the carrots. I'm definitely curious. So the other stuff that was put into this system, let's get the illustration out. You thought I wasn't going to have one, right? I figured I'd get my hands a little bit dirty before I introduce the illustration. So I've been experimenting with digital versions of this, printed out on paper. Just doesn't have the same sort of charm, if you will. But this here shows what was fed in each corner, and the little number next to it indicates the age at this point, as of today, of that feeding, holding back. And I've even tried to strike out those things that, at this point, have shown no signs or traces of leftovers at this point. So some of the older things, but one of the older, almost the oldest, one of the oldest things, going back to the second feeding, was the stem of the pumpkin is definitely holding out. So that's where we're going to be feeding today, right alongside the leftovers of the pumpkin stem and whatever else remains in there. So let's, all right, so the other thing that was kind of a thorn in our side, not a thorn in our side, but a curiosity in this corner was the avocado. So any traces of the avocado would now at this point go back almost 3 months, right? 90 days for that feeding. So in our attempt at trying to help that stuff break down, we took that stuff and we kind of smeared it all over the place. So here's some of an avocado's shell, even with some of the material, that makes up the avocado within it still. So these things were still the entire avocado shell with all the pasty fruit or vegetable or whatever it is inside of the shell still. And a couple of them were laid in here and left forever. It never seemed to go anywhere, so we wanted to help it out a little bit. So we'll definitely be recording avocados as still showing signs of leftovers. But the most recent application of, oh my goodness, seems to be a pretty popular spot over here, right? There should be asparagus showing leftovers for sure because of its very fibrous material. You can even see little strings of the fibers. The carrots, though, I'm kind of surprised. I usually put carrot peels in, so those little tiny flakes of carrot peel go pretty quick. Entire carrots, these little baby carrots, take a little bit longer. There's also potato, and that's what we're seeing here, a little pile of potato peels, maybe a little bit of the actual potato within the peels, but not a whole lot of leftovers. So they've done a great job polishing off the majority of that 10-day-old feeding of stuff that we knew was not going to last, right? I think I think I did make note of the fact that asparagus is a little bit tougher material because of that really fibery consistency. Somehow the worms do eventually break it down, but it takes them a little bit of time. But I sometimes feel kind of bad upending one of these feeding zones to this degree. I just hope I don't trigger some sort of a flight reaction within the worms. I think I've had that happen in the past, you know. Maybe I frighten the worms. They think their home is under attack or something, and they just go all over the place, haywire, start trying to leave the bin. Sometimes I worry about the somewhat intrusive nature of my feedings. So, interesting. Definitely some signs of the previous feeding, as well as leftovers of that 90-day-old avocado, which someday might come to pass. But now we're going to go back 20 days to see how the banana peels are holding up. We definitely saw traces of it left over last time. And you know, look at this dampness, right? You can even hear it probably, right? It's gooey. You know, if I were to do that squeeze test, and you know, I think fluid would come pouring out of this stuff. And I don't come in here with my water bottle. I don't spray these systems down at all. The moisture coming into these systems comes exclusively from the foods that they receive. I think, you know, don't hold me to that. I think that's usually the case. That's the reason I put the plastic coverings on, so that I don't have to supplement the moisture that has been lost to evaporation. The moisture can just stay in the system. And, you know, this really damp stuff. It's the other reason I thought maybe a little extra bedding could possibly help. But I don't know. I think we'll just continue down that road of trying to give this system an opportunity to continue breathing and airing out, maybe losing some of what appears to be excess moisture that the worms probably love. So, I don't know why I sweat it. I'm sure there'll be time in the near future to allow things to dry off here, let the material become a little bit more crumbly and flowing, but let's restore the banana corner to the way it was when we found it, to a certain degree. Maybe even sprinkle a little bit of this bedding that we put in here last time across the top. You know, I didn't even really get a chance to size up what the story was with this bedding. I mean, I piled a whole bunch on the top. I imagine that they'd come up from below and nibble at it. And they probably did, so it's just, you know, tough to tell how much of it was really made use of already. But it probably makes good use to just blend it in. Maybe we'll add a little bit more. Here, cantaloupe rinds. It's possible that we'll see some leftovers. We saw some leftovers last time we were in here 10 days ago. That's why it still remains on the list. Yep, there we go. Stuff definitely has a distinct appearance to it. Totally pick it out of the pile of material. But there's really not a whole lot left to it. It's just like a flake of paper, like a dry leaf or something. And just like everything else in the bin, it'll go too. Over time, everything has its own time scale in a worm bin. And some things really surprise you in terms of how long they take. Or sometimes quite the opposite. Sometimes they really surprise you in terms of how quickly they vanish. Alright, let's get down to work here. Perhaps I'll take a quick break here, you know, because I do need to bring some food down here. Something with a short name, something that doesn't take up a lot of space when we write it onto our diagram, right? Doesn't matter. I do have something in mind. And then we'll get back to opening up this corner here to apply today's feeding and see how things are progressing with what was placed in there most recently, which we probably won't see too many leftovers of. So I'll be right back. Well, I resisted the urge to go into my freezer to grab some nice juicy food for them because, you know, the moisture in here made me think it might be nice to put some stuff in here that's not very damp or doesn't have a great deal of moisture content. So as you can see here, I've got the peels from a couple oranges. I've got a few days worth of coffee here. And, you know, it does seem like a feeding like this might be a good idea. You know, maybe suck up a little bit of the, not so much that the food's going to suck up moisture, but it's not going to, you know, contribute moisture to the system. And in our little, you know, examination of the system, it seems like we blended in all of this bedding material into the all extents of this system. But, you know, as I look at this system, I don't know, it does seem to me like there's still a good bit of room in here, you know. So a lot of times it's the feeling that I'm running out of space that tells me it's time to drive a system towards completion. And even though this system's number of feedings, its age is all at that point where, you know, a lot of times I'd be thinking about driving a system to its end, here it just feels like we could keep on going for quite some time, you know. Oddly enough, here too, I'm feeling a good bit of moisture. I think there's just, you know, in general, a good bit of moisture in this system that could probably stand to exit the system and not leave the environment harsh or unfriendly. It just would, you know, not allow the stuff to keep clumping the way it does, you know. So, as you might have noticed here, I was jostling around a fairly large object here. This is the stem of the pumpkin. Looks pretty cool, right? Been in here 118 days. And what I do sometimes is I just, you know, jam my thumb into the end of it and chip off a piece just to show how fragile it's becoming. But I haven't done that in a few feedings now, and I don't want to do it today either. More recently, I've been more interested in just observing how this thing gradually breaks down on its own. If I pick it up at some point just to show it and it, you know, it crumbles into pieces, then that would be fine. But I don't want to actively disassemble it into little pieces. Now, the previous feeding was potato peels in here. So potato peels have been getting pretty popular. They were in the last feeding. They were in this feeding. Although in the last feeding they were just one of a couple things. Here the potato peels were the feeding. They were the one food type that was placed in here as the feeding for this corner. And sometimes it just seems so weird that you go back to one of these corners that's not received any fresh food in such a long time, and you just see so many worms in there. And I doubt that I'm just scaring the worms from one location to the other, and they're just sort of always one step ahead of me, and I keep bumping into the same worms. No, I think, you know, I think here we've got a system with a tremendously high worm count. And I don't know if it's because we've been able to keep to this 10-day interval, you know, just keep piling more and more food, you know. Does that sort of trigger something within the worm population, that there's, you know, a consistent, dependable, high volume of food always right around the corner? Whatever the reason, it just somehow feels like this system's got a tremendous population. Really great number of worms. And you know, we've created a huge hole down here. So I think we're going to get back to using bedding here, you know. Unusual, and for me at least, in a system that's, you know, 132 days of age. But here, I don't know, it just seems like it would just do the system good to have some sort of dry material down low. I've got a little bit of my prepared bedding left here. I'm running a bit low. I'll have to make more, but I've got enough to help the system along to get through our feeding today. So why don't I grab a nice, generous handful of this stuff. And I don't think we're going to stop at that, you know. I think these coffee filters, these all act as bedding too, you know. And besides bedding all becomes food too in a worm bin. So here we've kind of blended the coffee slash food in with the shredded paper and leaves slash bedding. But over time that'll all just eventually become food. And you know what? 132 day old system, you don't usually see me adding a lot of new bedding, but I've got a feeling we're going to deviate from the norm in this system, but just based on the amount of available space that seems to remain in here, you know. So we'll maybe we'll see what we could do in terms of pushing this system further along than what we usually do in most of my other systems. Hey, we got those other coffee filters. Why don't we give this one that's been serving this feeding zone indicator role for a while now, why don't we give this one an opportunity to be a little bit more useful and meaningful in the system, and let it now become bedding slash food. So, you know, this stuff I hope will be popular. I don't know how long we're going to continue to see leftovers of it, but when we record today's feeding, I think, you know, coffee will probably show up in there on the list, but it'll soon be scratched out because we'll probably soon not see many leftovers of any coffee, I believe. Stuff just either blends in or something, you know. I don't know if they eat it up or whatever, but it this is just pulverized eggshell, the grit we're going to include in today's feeding. So I just sort of get this feeling like the coffee might still be there, traces of it at least, but pretty soon after putting it in there, it becomes harder and harder to see this stuff anymore, you know. So next time we come back in here, we're adding a good bit, right? So maybe we will see some signs of it next time we come in here, but I'll be more interested to see how these orange peels progress. All right, it's a pretty good quantity right there of coffee, and then I've still got one more. I got 3. But the third filter we won't shred up this way. We'll just keep that one around so we can mark the top surface to show us where we last fed. Although we keep pretty good records otherwise. Might not be so important to mark it, but it's also a little bit of a tradition in my wormery to have a quote-unquote feeding zone indicator. It's usually a coffee filter. Okay, so the feeding is almost in. Let's get the last of it in here. I've got get these last few little scraps. You can see a couple pumpkin seeds in here, minus the insides. Been nibbled away. And maybe a little bit more grit. You know what? I think I pulled the worm chow out earlier thinking, do we go dry? Do we not put moisture in? Whatever. I've got all this worm chow I've created. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of that in there too, up the ante. It should be interesting. Totally dry. Maybe it'll suck up some moisture too. So, interesting system. Always fun to check in on this, but I always look forward to coming back into this system to see how things are progressing. And man, oh man, look at all that moisture. I think we'll do the same here as we did last time. Perhaps we could pile just a little bit more bedding right out onto the surface. Oop, this is all potato peel. Trying to be a stickler about making sure I put all the leftovers back in their appropriate place so that if there are leftovers, we can see them next time. But yeah, these are very informal experiments for fun. But there's no harm in trying to be a little bit more precise with stuff, you know, and then you can really take into consideration the meaning of the results of those tests, you know. If you took a little bit of care to keep some controls in place. So here's our indicator now to show that we've fed coffee and orange peels to our European nightcrawlers. And out here on the surface, let's get that collection of pre-made bedding back here. I'm certainly not going to use all of it, but we could probably grab about half of what remains in here. And then I gotta get my shredder out and make some more of this stuff. But like we did last time, I just grabbed a pretty good sized handful to mound it up out here in the middle, so that if worms feel like they need more carbon food source, more fresh bedding, whatever the case may be, there's a little haven for them to retreat to if in fact it is something they need. I don't know if they need it, but if they do, there it is. So let's see about putting this back in a way kind of similar to last time, but it almost feels like we could do even better. I mean, on another of my systems, I actually retired the plastic covering a few days ago so that the system can start possibly losing some of what appears to be excess moisture. And I thought about doing the same here, replacing the plastic covering with just a you know, with just like a piece of cardboard or something that doesn't do quite as good a job as plastic at holding the moisture down. But here, maybe since we're not really looking to drive this thing to completion, maybe on this one, since we're going to try to push the envelope and see how far we can go, maybe it is better to maintain a good degree of moisture. But, you know, whatever amount of drying does occur here, I think will be to the benefit of the bin. And naturally, we'll be keeping a close eye on things, make sure nothing goes awry and everything's tracking nicely. But other than a future check-in 10 days from now, at which point we'll see how things are progressing, I think we're done in here. I got a couple things I need to clean up and put away, but I'll take care of that once we're done here. Before I go, though, really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.